Hi everybody, I'm Kathy Van Ness, the General Manager of the Golden Door, and I'm happy to be here tonight with Christina Schaefer. She's a landscape ecologist with 30 years of experience in natural resources and planning, management, conservation, restoration, ecology. I think your job sounds like amazing. I feel like I do this every day, but yours sounds amazing. As the owner of Schaefer Ecological Solutions, she engages in the regional dialogue on planning, implementation of habitat conversation, something we're talking a lot about here at the Golden Door, including development of adaptive management and monitoring programs. She holds a Master of Science in Landscape Ecology from the University of Munich, wow, in Germany, and a Master of Landscape Architecture out of the University in Arizona, in Tucson, lovely city. So I think the first question we would like to understand, because I think we all love ecology and love the landscape, what is it like in the day of a landscape ecologist?
So if you like nature and if you like hiking and then you get paid for it, how better can it get?
I know, right?
I get to do biological surveys using my kayak.
So when you're surveying, are you surveying for the health of the land, or maybe somebody wants to develop something and you're on that other side like I know we're always talking about?
Yeah. That happens a lot, that I do the biological analysis for developments, but my work is actually more in the conservation end of things. So usually I work less for developers, I work more for conservation organizations.
Right.
So when I do surveys, I do it in order to understand what's out there, what's growing, what kind of animals are out there. We have a lot of, as you probably know or might know, San Diego is one of the hot spots in biodiversity in the world.
So explain that. I don't think that people might know that. Tell them
we
why.
have a lot of species here in San Diego, mainly due to our wonderful weather. We have a very mild climate, and that encourages a lot of biodiversity. So we have many, many plants, a lot of habitats. You look around you, I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous, and that creates a lot of biological life in our area. And compared to some other areas that have harsher climates, either hotter and drier or colder and wetter, we are right there in the middle, in the kind of the sweet spot. So we have lots of biodiversity to conserve and to protect.
Well, and I met Christina because we're obviously doing a lot of work here at the Golden Door to protect. We now have 600 acres, and we're now actually farming 600 acres, planting and oranges, and we're really, you see them in the trees. We now are picking them and doing them organic. But there's another piece of our business that's been really taking up some of our time, and that's the protection of this land. So we just went through an interesting, which I'd like you to explain it from your point of view, study about the golden eagle. We may not know, but the golden eagle is rare.
It's rare.
Very rare. And we were very excited about the prospect of finding the golden eagle at the Golden Door. Because if the golden eagle was at the Golden Door, which would be really incredibly fortuitous, right? It's some 40-mile, huge 5-mile, whatever it is, some giant radius that nothing can happen to disrupt the world of the golden eagle. Because they don't move to new neighborhoods, they go away. And so I want you to explain what you had to do. I had to explain this to the owner, what we had to do. It was quite interesting.
So yeah, golden eagles are majestic birds. They're very large birds, and they nest in the same spot year after year after year. So once you have a nest, the nest is protected, and within 4 miles of the nest, you can't have any activities. And because they're such a majestic bird and so important for our ecosystem, the way they work, the prey they catch, they basically clean up the environment for you. That's why they are so important for this area. So what we did is we looked actually along Deer Springs Road for interesting and conservation-worthy biology, and one of the items that came up was the potential nesting habitat for golden eagles. So when you look up on these mountains, you find these rocks, these rock outcrops. That's where golden eagle like to nest, in cliffs up high, so that they can soar over the landscape and find their prey. And we may still find them, we don't know. So the way we do this
you gotta tell them, oh my goodness.
is we put out dead animals.
Right, oh my gosh. Dear owner, having a great day today at the Golden Door. We will be putting carcasses along our ridge rocks. What kind of carcasses? Don't really know. What kind of carcasses was it? I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Could be pigs, could be
doesn't matter.
cows.
The only way to get them to come visit us was to feed them, right? To film them. You have to film them.
Yeah, we actually put transmitters on them.
Right.
So they fly around with these transmitters.
Oh my gosh.
And that's how we attract them. That's how we can count them, or how we can detect them, is by putting out food for them, and they go for that.
So this is an ongoing project for us to determine, because we feel that they may be here, and we definitely want to know that.
Right.
Because they are here, and people do develop, even if it's within 4 miles, it's a problem.
Right.
It's
And
a big
the
problem.
USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, actually has a study right now for golden eagle, regional, the entire San Diego County essentially. And this was kind of a hole. We didn't have data for this area. So having Kathy allow us to put carcass on this property was like, yay!
I was going to send a note out, a morning note to guests. Please do not notice the pigs along your hiking trails. Please try to ignore this. This is all for the good of finding the famous golden eagle. Please excuse us for our what we're doing. Can you describe some of the renovation projects that you've been involved with that have been really critical to this part of the world?
Ecological restoration. So ecological restoration is basically fixing nature. As we described before, there's development going on, there's destruction of nature going on. Well, we need to keep our habitats and our biology alive for the biodiversity as well as for ourselves. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Richard Louv, but he wrote a book about nature deficit syndrome in our children. So he's found that nature is extremely important for our psychological well-being, our health, and that our children nowadays are so glued to the TV and to technology that they have never experienced the outdoors, and that a lot of their, ADHD and whatever else, depression that you find in young adults could be attributed, or it could be attributable to the nature deficit syndrome. So again, conserving our natural environment is really important. And so what I do is, when a development comes in and destroys nature, I come in and I build it back up.
So there's a good question of that. At what point of time do you go back to that's the marker of the buildup? Like, is it 10 years? Is it 20? Because, all throughout the ages, the land has changed.
Right.
So is there some sort of a formula to say that I'm going to go back to the 1800s or the 1900s, or what is the restoration time frame?
That is a really, really good question, and I don't know if we can answer that, because it really depends where you are. Like in Europe, for instance, I'm from Germany, and in Europe we have a cultivated landscape. So there, the question is, what are we restoring? Are we restoring the cultivated landscape? When people started with agriculture, and because if you were to restore Europe as it originally, before people came in, as it existed, it would be beech forest, like close canopy beech forest. And the same goes for here, although we don't have that history of cultivation as much. So when we restore landscapes, we usually try to restore them as they would naturally occur, dependent on the climate, on the soil. And I do that looking at historical aerial photographs. So I actually look at photos that were taken 1928, 1930, because that's the start of when aerials were available. And I look at what the landscape looked like then.
Well, and I want to share something. 3 or 4 years ago, when I first joined the Golden Door, the agriculture side of our business and the health of our property side of the business was probably not at an all-time high. And we actually had to go back to the original time of farming, which meant we don't use pesticides, we don't buy fertilizer. I'm going to share some things that we do here that's so fascinating. We buy female cow horns. This is an incredible piece of information, shocking. Female cow horns, because I guess they're better. Welcome to nature's world, better than the male cow horns, what do I know? And we did female manure, and we actually, for 3 years, have taken this female biodynamic farming, which is what we do, the most perfect original form of farming. We put this manure into the horns, and we bury them throughout the gardens. All the time, every year. They're all out there right now. And as time goes on, after a year of being in the ground, isn't this interesting? After a year of being in the ground, we dig up these horns and we pour out the fertilizer into a bucket of water, and they stir it up like a big soup, and they use that to put it on the plants. And if you've tasted our lettuces and our tomatoes and things like that, they are so good, the broccolis and the vegetables. And I wonder, when we talk about farming today and going back to the original land, the land is getting so ripped of its nutrients. It took almost 3 years to get the land back to putting flavor back into the vegetables. 3 years. Do you get involved with that, of helping guide people in that world?
We in my world, we usually work with what we have, because ecological restoration is really trying to put the land back
to without even before the farmers
to how it's supposed to be,
right,
how nature made it,
how it left it.
And nature really doesn't make any artificial fertilizers. So in order to get the native plants, so we work with native plants exclusively, to get them to grow again, you actually don't want to put fertilizers on, because the soil, the native soil, has all these plants need. And if you give them more, they actually tend to be less stable. They get sick. They grow really fast. You irrigate them, you put fertilizer on them, they grow extremely fast. They use all of their energy to grow, and then a year or two later, they just fall apart.
Since you're focused on California, what is the biggest endangered risk today that we have in California?
Probably climate change.
Just strictly getting too hot, right?
Getting too hot and the sea level to rise.
Right.
So sea level rise is actually a really big issue here in California, not just for the natural environment, but obviously for the urban environment also. And so what we do in order to plan ahead for sea level rise is we try to put in buffers. And these landscape buffers get created through ecological restoration. So we're trying to expand where we can our salt marshes and our riparian areas along the rivers, so that when sea level rises, we still have enough nature to absorb the water in terms that explains it a little bit better, to absorb the water so that our developments don't get affected. Because if you have your development straight by that rising water, you can drown out a lot of. One
of the biggest challenges we still have here is that this was all underwater in its original time.
Long time ago.
This all land was under the sea, because even today we have to mix our waters because our current waters are too salty, for what we grow, even for some of the trees.
Really?
Some of the trees go into serious stress if there's not a natural mix of waters between a fresher water and the salty water. So it's kind of interesting, after how many years this sea has been way far out there, like it's not exactly close, right? This land is still filled with salt, because that's what the land was. What was the hardest project that you ever saw? What was the one that you found the most frustrating?
Oh boy, where to start?
I bet you there's a lot.
The most frustrating projects generally in my world are the projects that get too political.
Yeah, I know those.
So, and again, I don't want to put a finger on a single project, but I mean, widening of Deer Springs Road is certainly frustrating.
We're fighting.
Right.
We're spending a lot of time fighting development because we believe this land should stay in its natural state. We love development. We just don't think it should be out here in the middle of nowhere with all the traffic and the cars and the gases. I think it should be in the urban areas.
Right, and unfortunately, money talks, and so that's when things can get really frustrated for a biologist that is interested in the conservation of the environment.
Do you find that government is listening more? We have the endangered lead species on our side, we have Sierra, we have all these people who are sort of understanding our message about how to save the land, but do you find that they're kind of put over here and you're like the frivolous guys and government just continues to move ahead? Are they listening?
They are listening. They are listening. They have to listen, and it really depends on what government arm is involved in. But there are some governments that are completely dependent on taxpayer money. So for them, it's much harder to listen because they do have to answer to their taxpayers.
Right.
And then there's other governments, government arms. The County of San Diego and the City of San Diego, for instance, have parks of recreation, and they are more concerned about conservation. And so the great thing about San Diego is that we have conservation plans in place. And it's a wonderful way of meeting in the middle, where we allow development, and in exchange, we conserve large swaths of land where the land is still intact, where the biological resources are still there. And so it strikes a really fine balance between development and conservation.
We have the most intelligent, incredible guest here every single week. And we all care about the planet, and we all care about the environment. We all want to not hurt our planet. But we live in cities, and how do real people, how can we make it be all involved in helping this planet be a better place? Because this is far away. I mean, we're out here. It's easy to have a conversation about the golden eagles and the turtles that we found that aren't even supposed to be there, but they are there. Right?
But this is one place.
I
mean, this is a great place. I mean, you're doing a wonderful job of really inviting nature into your place.
Well, we did something else. We, as you've noticed on your arrivals into properties, we don't have plastic bottles on the property. We are a big proponent about, if you can just imagine one day in Las Vegas of one series of conventions, how many plastic bottles are used. I think it's somewhere in the billions of bottles in a single few hours of every single day. And they will be here long after we'll be here. So we're actually working with the hospitality industry to try to say, like, it's really not that hard to fill up a water bottle, really. It's not that hard.
But there's so many places and so many things one can do, places you can get involved in and things you can do. I mean, recycling. For those of you that are not in San Diego is really doing a very good job in bringing recycling to every household.
So what happens with recycling? I think that's a really interesting question. What's the real story behind recycling? Like, well, you've got the big boxes, right? And you've got the glasses, right? And you've got the plastics. But then where does it really go?
Well, it goes into a plant, and I'm not a recycling expert.
I know, but you know what I mean? Does it, like us as environmentalists, is it actually going somewhere and making a difference, or is it just piling up someplace else by category?
No.
They actually really are using it.
They are using it. Oh yeah, and you can find clothing and fabrics made out of Coke bottles. You know, I mean, recycling and upcycling, and I think it's a trend, which is a good thing, a trend for people to now think about recycling and upcycling a lot more. I mean, it is still costly. I mean, there's a carbon footprint to recycling because you do use machinery to process the recycled materials. So it's not all, you know, going back into the environment. Some of it does go into our atmosphere, but it's still better than using coal and non-renewable. For sure. Non-renewable.
You know, I once spoke to a biologist, and they said that we're losing more species of plants every single year on the earth than we're gaining. Do you think is that a true statement?
Plants and animals.
And we're losing more than we're bringing, that are, obviously new things develop every day, but we're losing more varieties and more species than possibly we actually can, as people can imagine.
Evolution is a very, very slow process. So for new plants and species to evolve, it takes a long time. But development happens very fast. I mean, rainforest gets destroyed at a very, very fast level, and we don't even know yet how many species or what type of species the rainforest contains. We never really had an opportunity to study it.
Isn't that interesting?
So we lose species on a daily basis that we don't even know exist.
Really?
And that's...
So in California, are there 3 species that you can name of in the plant world, of course, or maybe even in the animal world, mostly plant world, that we would be losing, that we would recognize?
As I said, we have a lot of plants here in San Diego County, and there are a few that are endangered. Now that you would recognize, I'm not
something
so sure.
That we would recognize.
But there is a really interesting ecosystem that is endemic to California, and we have it here in Southern California too. It's called vernal pools. I don't know if you know what vernal pools are. It's a really, really cool thing, because it's an ecosystem that thrives on water. Now, as you probably know, we don't have that much water here in San Diego. It only rains in the winter. We're a Mediterranean climate, so we usually have rains between November and March, and none in the summer. So this is an ecosystem that is completely adapted to being totally underwater in the winter and then completely dry in the summer. So it has to live with this, you know, with extremes, extreme wet and extreme dry. Vernal pools are puddles or little ponds, little detentions in the landscape. We don't know exactly how they were formed, but here in San Diego County, there are these very, very homogeneous, what we call mima mounds. They're little hills and little depressions. And when these depressions fill with water in the winter, there is no inlet, no outlet. So it's like a cup. It's like a cup of tea. You know, you fill it up and it doesn't go out unless you overfill it. That's what a vernal pool is like. And so the flora and the fauna that's contained within the soils of this vernal pool is what's so fascinating, because when that water hits the ground, that's when the eggs and the seed germinate. So you probably know what sea monkeys are, right? So we have a similar species that's called fairy shrimp in these soils. They have little eggs, and when the water hits them, when the water hydrates them, that's when they germinate. And within a few weeks of these rainfalls, they reach adulthood, they reproduce, and then they'll go back into the ground. And they can sustain themselves in the soil as eggs and cysts for decades. So if that vernal pool stays dry for, 50, 60, 70, 100 years, and then gets wet, they still germinate, they still hatch. And the same with the plants. And because this ecosystem is so rare, the plants and the plants and the animals are so endemic to this situation, and that's where we have most of our endangered species. So we have about 7 species that are associated with vernal pools that are on the federal endangered species list.
So while you're at the Golden Door, share with our guests what did we learn about the Golden Door's land? Because we're pretty original, I would say. You know, most of it. Was there something that we learned in there special? Were there plants or things that you could see that you hadn't seen? I'm sure.
Well, I haven't actually had a chance to look at all the plants that are here, but there's a cultural heritage that is very, very interesting. And then from a biological perspective, you have the chaparral, which is the dark vegetation that grows on the north-facing slopes. It's kind of the leathery vegetation that's drought tolerant, so it withstands drought.
Didn't you find some Indians and scrapings? That was somebody else.
That wasn't me, because I'm not the archaeologist, but I know that there's really rich cultural heritage.
There's where they were crushing the seeds to make
matatas, right? They use the oak, the acorns to make flour.
So we're going to protect them.
But these oaks here that you see all around you, those are the original landscape that forms the character of this area.
For those of you who are climbing that mountain on the far side where the tomato patch is being built, today we just unveiled the most gorgeous oak tree that has been buried by cactus for 50, 60 years. When we took the cactus with all its angry spines away, hiding in this tree, and it fought, has holes where the cactus tried to poke holes in it, literally lines of where the cactus was trying to not be happy with the tree. And here this giant tree, beautiful oak, is standing there majestically just towering over this land, and you didn't even know it was there before. It's incredible. So I really encourage you to explore all the different hikes we have. It is so beautiful. You know, every time we have a guest, we always ask a guest at the end of our conversations. And our conversations are fun and light and meant to just tell us something we may not know. And hopefully you gain some piece of knowledge about the Golden Door that you might not have known before. But the most important part is all of our guests leave our guest a golden nugget. Some piece of information or something we can do in our lives that we might not have gotten if we hadn't been able to sit and chat today. So what would be your golden nugget for our guest tonight?
Well, my golden nugget is to just appreciate nature. Don't get yourself into the nature deficit syndrome.
Yeah.
Just take it all in and really enjoy it, and try every day in your life, every day, to spend some time outdoors.